Okay, so the reason I call this Putin's revenge is that the Europeans tried to run a racket on the money that they, along with Biden, stole. They say it's seized. They stole this money from Russia at the beginning of the Ukraine war, the assets, up to about $250 billion worth of assets. And the reason that it's Putin's revenge is because yesterday they met along with the money-grubbing Zelensky to decide on how they're going to keep on funding Ukraine's adventure against Russia for the next 2 years. Now, what they wanted to do was a racket in which they use as interest from Russian assets to lend Ukraine money to keep the war going on against Russia, and also maybe for future reconstruction. And when it's time for Ukraine to pay it back, they'll also use either Russia's assets or the interest from their assets to pay it back. That's racketeering, and it's a very ugly, aggressive move towards Russia. Basically, Russia's in a war with Ukraine. You seize their money, and you use their money to give weapons and so-called reconstruction to Ukraine. And then when it's time for Ukraine to pay it back, it's going to come from Russia's money. No doubt the Europeans will get paid. Euroclear, which was supposed to be doing it from Belgium, and German weapons manufacturers would have got paid. So what they were trying to do is the Europeans are trying to boost their dead economy, their dying economy, by using Russian capital, which would have been a very oppressive move towards Russians, but it didn't work. Now, the Belgians, who basically are the sort of heart of the EU, and the Hungarians with Orbán were against using this money for Russia. And the reason they're saying that they're against it is because it's illegal and it'll make the West look bad, because there's a lot of legal ramifications and Russia could sue them and they'd be in big trouble. My argument is that that's not why they stepped back and didn't do it. They stepped back and didn't do it. And when you see people in Europe or the West, the only time they don't do something is not because it's illegal. It's because there will be consequences to pay. For example, they know that they're helping fund a genocide in Gaza. They're not worried about the legality of that. So why would they be worried about the legality of stealing money from Russia unless they could be punished for it? And that's what we're going to get into in today's show. I'll make it very clear. Russia has threatened to seize Western assets in Russia if they move ahead and do anything with Russia's money. Russia wants its money back. The money that Biden and von der Leyen and who was it, Boris Johnson and all those guys when the war started, or the other lady who had to step down, they want their money back. And they will seize Western assets. And a lot of oligarchs in the West would have been pissed. So my argument is that it's not just most likely, it's most definitely the case that they didn't want that retaliation from Russia. And this goes to give you a bigger, broader view of how the world works. Whether you're from Russia or China or America or from Europe, there's transnational corporations and everything is interlinked. And in this globalized world, everybody's dependent on everybody. America, to this day, American companies are making money in Russia, despite what they may tell you in television with sanctions. Russian companies are making some money in America, not as much. Chinese companies are making money in America. American companies are making money in China. Everybody's interconnected. So if you fuck over anybody in any country, they're going to fuck you over too. So the Europeans couldn't do this. They have a lot of assets in Russia because the way the global world works, they're in trade with Russia, a lot of cooperation, a lot of things that are going on with entrepreneurs and things, and they couldn't afford it. So that's one of the reasons. Secondly, as soon as they started talking about using this interest or the initial capital of Russian assets to fund this war, which is running out of money since America stopped pumping money into it and is moving out. The Europeans were panicking. How are we going to continue? And when I say Europeans, I mean the leaders and the corporations, not the people, because they're suffering. How are we going to keep on making money? Germany needs to produce weapons and sell them to somebody. So we have to use Russia's money to buy our weapons to give to Ukraine, and then use Russia's money to pay back the loan that Ukraine owes us. So they wanted to use a racketeering scheme. And as soon as they said that, Putin, who's doing exceptionally well on the battlefield, started escalating what's going on in the battlefield and said, oh, they can do whatever they want. We're going to keep on marching towards Kiev. And Putin has said that he has no intention of attacking Europe and that he's open to finally winding this war down. Of course, with the proviso that the eastern part of the country is going to remain to him, no matter what Zelensky says. Zelensky is delusional if he thinks Russia is going to give up those lands that they have. And also, they're not going to give up Crimea. So he can forget about that. And if they're not careful, he'll take Odessa. So they were getting panicky that Putin was going to press the accelerator on the war and continue taking more and more land from Ukraine, which is, for Western Europe, the more land that Putin takes from Ukraine is the less land that they can exploit in their own economic system. So the fear of that, because they can see that Putin's not playing games. And now the last thing, Trump warned Europe not to seize that money, not to use those assets because it was illegal. And Trump has an alternative plan, which Putin seems as if he might be slightly open to, which is that 100 billion of the assets and that the U.S. is holding will be used to invest in Ukraine after a ceasefire to build it up. But 50 is going to be done as a business model in which profit will come from it. And 50% of the profit will go to the U.S. and 50% of the profit would go to Ukraine. I'm not sure if Putin would agree with that, but it gets more complex. And then he said, then after that, there would be a joint U.S.-Russian venture, which would manage Ukraine. Especially, I'm guessing it's going to be the eastern part that's taken, and also some reinvestment in the western part to help redevelop it. But more importantly, to focus on the rare minerals in eastern Ukraine, which the U.S. is interested. And the idea is that Russia might say, okay, yeah, we started this war, supposedly. We don't mind giving some reparations to Ukraine if we come out with a net profit. And the net profit would be that the U.S. and Russia would be working hand in hand to invest in Ukraine and its redevelopment and in the mining of its resources and leave Europe out. That's what's happening. And I think Putin might agree to that if he's very practical. He can say, okay, well, this is sort of bitchy. They're not going to give me all my money back, but they're telling me they can use my money to do an investment in Western Ukraine and Eastern Ukraine and give some of the money back to Ukraine, and U.S. takes 50% of the profit. But moving forward, we're going to be exploiting the resources in the Ukraine, U.S. and Russia, and managing its development so that the U.S. and Russia are now partners in the capitalization of Ukraine. That sounds like something that he could do. And this is Putin's revenge, because now the little bitches in Europe who decided to jump in bed with America and try to encircle Russia with NATO are now losing their best. They're losing their father. The U.S. is Europe's father. They're losing him. And now he's going into bed with Russia. And it makes sense to me. Russia, China, and U.S. are the richest, are the most powerful, and probably, and India also, have strongest economies. Russia is a little bit behind U.S. and China, but Russia is a major player because it has oil and other resources. And it makes sense for them to work together rather than U.S. working with Europe. Europe has nothing to offer the U.S. anymore, especially since the world is moving towards BRICS and the global south. So what Trump is doing is breaking apart NATO and now making the U.S. a transactional nation. And it can do transactions with Russia because Russia has minerals and oil and stuff. And together with Russia, they can dictate what happens with Ukrainian resources. Europe is out in the cold. Europe is finished. Last thing, as I said, there was no way that Europe was going to give up on using Russia's assets if there wasn't going to be consequences. And the main consequences are from the U.S. I think Trump made it clear that he would start funding right-wing movements in Europe, and also would totally disinvest in NATO and the security of Europe and everything else, and let them be on their own if they did that. Because he was hinting at that with his new security plan, which came before the announcement of what EU was going to do. And what EU is going to do is use investments from their own markets to produce, I think, maybe 95 to 100 billion euro to keep the war going on for 2 years from 2 years for Ukraine. And Ukraine will have to pay them back at the end. And they're boldly saying that the payment will come from Russia as reparations for the damage they did to Ukraine. Good luck for that happening. It's not going to happen. So what Europe doing now is desperately, they need to keep this war going on so that a few elite people in Europe and the EU can make money off of the war continuing. And maybe the German economy can get a bump by providing tanks and other useless weapons to them to keep this thing going. And Zelensky can get a few dollars in his pocket. So they want to keep the scam going, even though they're going to lose. And they're boldly saying that when it's all over, the money that they're investing in it will be given back by Putin. It's not going to be given back by Putin. If after this war, Western Ukraine is in the hands of Europe, they're going to bleed Western Ukraine to get their money back. That's how all of this is going to end. Thank you very much, Putin. You've gotten your revenge. It's not over yet. We're going to see how this unfolds, but we're hoping this continues. Because what the EU did and what Biden did is disgraceful. They brought all of us close to a nuclear war over Ukraine's minerals. Because that's what this is all about. This was all about stopping the Ukraine from getting closer to Russia before the Maidan Revolution, in which there was a Russian-speaking Ukrainian president, and they overthrew him because he was going to work with Russia rather than with the EU. And the EU want their hands on Ukrainian resources. This is what you fucking get. You're not going to get anything. And now you're not even going to get Russia's cheap oil and minerals. But I have a feeling that once they work out a peace agreement, Russia might forgive Europe and enter back and give them cheap oil and gas to keep their economy going and tell them to shut up because they're not going to touch Russian assets. Thank you very much.